The hidden trap of trading. You know the quiet despair, mastering trading rules, trying every strategy, yet the market refuses to yield. You execute with conviction, watch trades crumble, identical setups you knew would work explode for others, profit you missed. This knowing but failing cycle isn't frustrating, it's soul-crushing. You blame news, platform, luck, anything but your inconsistent actions. I lived years in that loop, convinced the next indicator was the key. But what if the perfect strategy was the trap? What if the problem isn't what you're doing, but who you are showing up as? This isn't purely tactics, it's deep self-awareness for sustainable growth. I have received the section name and the section summary, but the crucial word allocation integer is missing. Without a precise word count, I cannot adhere to the strict constraint that the generated script section must be exactly the allocation, not one word more or less. Please provide the exact word allocation for this section so I can proceed with writing it. The teenager versus architect identity. Before any grand strategy can unfold, before the quiet rebuilding of a foundation can even begin, we must first understand the ground we stand on, or more accurately, the mindset we bring to the field. For years, I'd watched others, and at times myself, fall prey to what I came to call the teenager identity in the realm of financial decision-making. This persona is defined by an impulsive, emotional, and intensely reactive approach, driven by the seductive promise of quick thrills and immediate gratification. Like a restless adolescent, the teenager chases every shiny new trend, every breathless headline, every whispered tip, convinced that the next big thing is just around the corner. They react to market dips with panic and market surges with euphoria, allowing the ebb and flow of collective noise to dictate their every move. The teenager often lacks a coherent plan, relying instead on gut feelings, social media consensus, or a vague hope that luck will be on their side. They might swing wildly from one asset to another, selling low in fear and buying high in exuberance, leaving a trail of emotional regret and depleted capital in their wake. Their approach is characterized by short attention spans, a disinterest in foundational research, and a profound aversion to delayed gratification. They are constantly looking for the shortcut, the hack, the overnight success story, convinced that true wealth is built on sudden, dramatic victories rather than patient, deliberate effort. But there is another way, a counter-identity that offers not just survival, but true dominion over one's financial destiny. The architect. Unlike the chaotic energy of the teenager, the architect operates with calm precision, an unwavering discipline, and an unshakable commitment to process. This identity doesn't chase, it builds. It doesn't react, it designs. The architect understands that long-term wealth is not found in fleeting fads, but in carefully laid foundations, robust structures, and strategic patience. They approach the market not as a casino, but as a complex ecosystem that requires meticulous study, thoughtful planning, and consistent execution. The architect dedicates time to understanding underlying principles, performing due diligence, and crafting a personal blueprint tailored to their specific goals and risk tolerance. They are immune to the daily clamor, instead focusing on the structural integrity of their portfolio, the compounding power of their investments, and the continuous refinement of their strategy. When faced with market volatility, the architect sees not a threat, but an opportunity to evaluate their thesis, perhaps rebalance, and always stick to the plan. Their power comes from clarity, not speed, from control, not reaction. They understand that every block laid, every document reviewed, every patient decision contributes to a monumental structure that will withstand time. It is a quiet power, one that derives strength from methodical progress and an unyielding vision for the future. This brings us to a crucial point of introspection. As you reflect on your own journey, which of these identities feels most familiar? Have you perhaps unwittingly allowed the impulsive teenager to steer your financial ship, or have you begun to cultivate the disciplined mindset of the architect? The distinction is more than just a metaphor. It's a critical self-assessment that paves the way for all subsequent actions. Recognizing which voice dominates your financial decisions is the first essential step towards reclaiming agency and charting a course for genuine, sustainable comeback. Shift 1. From profit seeker to process master. My past self, the profit seeker, existed in constant reaction. Every market swing, every single P&L dictated my emotional state. My identity hinged on external outcomes, leaving me vulnerable, chasing chasing numbers rather than building stability. It was chaotic, exhausting, forever reacting to forces beyond control. Then came the pivotal reframe. Power wasn't in chasing profit, but in mastering process. I shed the profit seeker identity, becoming a process master. My goal shifted from immediate results to unwavering adherence to a disciplined routine. This detachment from outcomes, this quiet focus on the how, was my liberation. It built an unshakable foundation, a silent command center, independent of external noise. This was my first strategic move. Shift 2, from fearful gambler to risk architect. If the first shift had been about identifying the battlefield, this second was about mastering the inner landscape, the treacherous terrain of my own psychology. The hardest lessons weren't about reading charts or analyzing fundamentals, but about confronting the insidious whisper of fear, the paralyzing dread of loss, and its equally destructive cousin, the impulse to revenge trade. I vividly remember the gut-wrenching sensation after a position went sour. Not just the financial sting, but the profound sense of personal failure, a blow to my self-worth that triggered an irrational compulsion to immediately reclaim what I'd lost. This wasn't strategy. It was a desperate lashing out, often doubling down on poor decisions, turning a small cut into a gaping wound. I knew this cycle intimately. It was a vicious loop where market volatility fueled emotional chaos, and emotional chaos, in turn, fueled more reckless decisions. My trading log became a testament to this pattern, a clear divide between the calm, calculated entries and the frantic, revenge-driven exits. The fearful gambler operated on hope and panic, reacting to every market flicker with a jolt of adrenaline or despair. This wasn't merely unprofitable, it was exhausting, a constant drain on my mental and emotional reserves. My entire approach lacked an anchor, my decisions drifting on the winds of sentiment. The pivot arrived not as a sudden epiphany, but as a slow, deliberate reframing, almost like an internal rebranding. I needed to shed the skin of the fearful gambler and step into the role of a risk architect. This new identity wasn't about avoiding risk. It was about defining, understanding, and managing it with surgical precision. It was about moving from a reactive stance to a proactive one, from hoping for a good outcome to engineering a robust process. The first principle of the risk architect was simple yet profound. Predefine your risk. Before a single dollar was committed, before the trade button was even considered, I had to articulate in cold, hard numbers precisely how much capital I was willing to allocate and, crucially, how much I could afford to lose. This wasn't a mental note, it was a physical act, an entry in a spreadsheet, a stop-loss order placed immediately upon entry. This clear boundary, set when emotions were neutral, served as an impenetrable shield against later panic. It meant that every trade, regardless of outcome, was a known variable within a larger equation, not an unpredictable gamble. Secondly, I embraced probabilities. The fearful gambler saw every loss as a personal failing, every win as a validation of innate genius. The risk architect understood that trading was a game of probabilities over a series of events, not a prediction of individual outcomes. A single losing trade didn't signify incompetence, just as a single winning trade didn't guarantee future success. My focus shifted from the outcome of this trade to the robustness of my entire trading system. This required an almost detached, statistical perspective, a willingness to accept that even the best strategies would have losing streaks, and that was simply part of the game. It was about having an edge and patiently allowing that edge to play out over time rather than demanding immediate gratification. Finally, and perhaps most liberating, was the reclassification of losses. For the fearful gambler, a loss was a blow, a setback, a reason for anger or self-recrimination. For the risk architect, a loss became tuition. Every trade that didn't go my way was an opportunity to collect data, to identify what could be improved in my analysis, my entry criteria, or my execution. It was an investment in my education, a cost of doing business in a complex, dynamic environment. I stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what can I learn from this? This shift neutralized the sting of failure, transforming it into a data point, an input for refinement. This transformation from a slave to emotion to a master of strategy didn't happen overnight. It was a continuous practice of discipline, self-awareness, and relentless process refinement. But by consciously adopting the identity of a risk architect, by predefining every potential downside, by understanding probabilities, and by viewing every misstep as a valuable valuable lesson. I effectively defanged the emotional beast within. My reactions became less impulsive and more measured. My resilience grew with each analyzed outcome, and the clarity I sought began to emerge from the chaos. With my internal architecture rebuilt, the next steps felt less like a gamble and more like a calculated construction. Boredom, the daily identity declaration. The initial shock had long faded, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. But resolution alone, I quickly understood, was not enough. Before any external blueprint could be drawn, the internal architect needed a radical recalibration. My past trading habits, impulsive and emotionally driven, had been a reflection of an underlying identity, one that saw opportunity as fleeting and risk as an enemy to be outmaneuvered rather than managed. To become the person capable of executing a disciplined, long-term plan, I needed to declare that person into existence daily. The words I chose were deliberate, forged in the crucible of past mistakes. I am a patient, disciplined, and consistently profitable trader. Every syllable was weighed, every adjective selected to counteract the exact weaknesses that had plagued me. Patient, to counter the urge to rush, to chase, to leap before looking. Disciplined, to cement the commitment to rules, to strategy over emotion, to adherence over impulse. And consistently profitable as the inevitable outcome of the first two. Not a hopeful wish, but a declared state of being, a natural consequence of embodying patience and discipline. This wasn't a mere affirmation. It was an identity declaration, an active, conscious rewiring of my subconscious operating system. I understood that my old self, the one prone to emotional swings and rash decisions, wasn't a separate entity to be fought, but a set of deeply ingrained neural pathways. To carve new ones, to solidify a new self, required consistent, intentional effort, a daily ritual of mental reconstruction. Each morning, before the world outside my window stirred, I would stand before my bathroom mirror, not just reciting, but feeling the words. My reflection met my gaze, unwavering as I spoke the declaration aloud, the quiet hum of my own voice filling the silent space. I'd close my eyes and visualize what patience looked like in a trade, the serene stillness as price moved against my position, trusting my analysis, waiting for the perfect entry point, refusing to be drawn into the market's noise. I'd imagine the calm certainty of discipline, adhering to my stop-loss without hesitation, taking profit targets without the insidious whisper of greed pushing for just a little more. And I'd connect to the quiet satisfaction of consistent profitability, not a volatile spike, but a steady, deliberate accumulation of capital, week after week, month after month, year after year. This wasn't about wishing, it was about embodying the future now. The evening ritual mirrored the mornings, a powerful bookend to the day. As dusk settled, I'd revisit the declaration, reflecting on moments where I had, or hadn't, embodied its principles. This wasn't an exercise in self-recrimination, but honest self-assessment. Where had my patience wavered? Where had discipline been tested? Each repetition wasn't just sound, it was a microscopic, deliberate act of neurosculpting. My brain, a remarkably adaptable organ, had spent years reinforcing pathways of doubt and hurried decisions, fueled by past losses and the desperate need to make it back. Now I was intentionally etching new ones, pathways of calm, clarity, and competence. It was an active declaration of neuroplasticity in action. The first few weeks were challenging. The old neural connections, well-worn grooves of habit, still clamored for attention. Doubts would surface, the quiet skepticism of a mind accustomed to failure. But I met these internal resistances not with anger, but with the steady, quiet force of repetition. Every time a self-defeating thought emerged, I gently but firmly brought my focus back to the declaration. It was like training a muscle, initially weak and easily fatigued, but growing stronger with each consistent, intentional exertion. The contrast between my past chaotic internal landscape and the disciplined mental architecture I was building became starker with each passing day. I began to notice subtle shifts. The urge to check charts compulsively diminished. Market volatility, once a source of anxiety, became merely information, not a trigger. Decisions which had once felt like frantic gambles started to feel like deliberate chess moves, each one considered, each one part of a larger, coherent strategy. The internal noise began to quiet, replaced by a sustained inner calm. This wasn't instant magic. It was the slow, persistent work of reshaping the very core of my identity. This daily act, simple in its execution, profound in its impact, was the bedrock upon which all future strategic strategic actions would rest. With this internal shift taking root, the external world was now ready for a different kind of engagement, one built not on fear or desperation, but on a declared and embodied competence. Actionable protocol, the pre-trade identity check. The screen would flicker, alive with numbers, an urgent pulse of green and red. In my former life, this was the exact moment where the old patterns, the teenager, as I'd come to call that impulsive, reactive self, would surge with an almost primal force. A whisper of fear, a phantom thrill of FOMO, and I'd be off, chasing a market movement without true conviction, propelled by nothing more than a visceral, unexamined urge. It was a cycle that had cost me dearly, not just in capital, but in the quiet erosion of self-trust, leaving behind a subtle, persistent shame. Breaking it demanded more than just intellectual understanding. It required an actionable physical protocol, a circuit breaker installed right at the perilous point of decision. I called it the pre-trade identity check. Before any click, any order placement, any commitment of precious capital, I introduced a mandatory pause, a deliberate moment where the incessant noise of the market faded into a distant hum, and I physically stepped back, not just from the keyboard, but from the immediate magnetic pull of potential profit or looming loss. This wasn't about suppressing raw emotion, an impossible and ultimately fruitless endeavor. It was about reframing it, placing a conscious, high-stakes filter between external stimulus and internal response. The ritual was deceptively simple, yet profoundly difficult to embed at first, demanding consistent, rigorous application. It began with taking a slow, deep breath, allowing the agitated energy that often gathered in my chest to slowly settle, creating an internal quiet. I'd lean back, away from the glaring screen, letting my gaze drift from the frantic, ever-changing charts to the steady, unmoving objects in my peripheral vision, the solid grain of my desk, the quiet, reassuring hum of the air purifier, grounding me in the present, tangible reality. Then came the core question, the precise pivot point. Is this action aligned with the identity of the unbeatable trader I am becoming? This wasn't a superficial question about the market's immediate direction, nor was it merely about the specific trade's potential profitability in isolation. It was fundamentally about me, us, the person making the decision, and the deliberate future self I was meticulously constructing. It forced an immediate internal alignment. The unbeatable trader wasn't some mythical, unreachable ideal. It was the version of myself I was painstakingly building, brick by painful brick, lesson by hard-won lesson, each setback transmuted into an insight. This emerging identity was rigidly defined by discipline, by strategic foresight, by unwavering emotional resilience, by a profound respect for capital, and by an absolute commitment to my meticulously crafted protocols. The teenager, on the other hand, was defined by raw impulse, chasing ephemeral adrenaline, willfully ignoring objective data, and fundamentally sabotaging long-term, carefully articulated goals for fleeting, often illusory gratification. The contrast couldn't have been starker, a chasm between two distinct operating systems. The teenager acted solely on unexamined fear and raw greed. The unbeatable trader operated from a position of analytical clarity and a statistical edge, patiently gleaned from countless hours of study. The teenager impulsively chased volatile, high-risk swings, praying for an unlikely stroke of luck. The unbeatable trader waited patiently for high-probability setups, relying solely on robust, back-tested analysis and meticulous risk management. The teenager saw every slight market twitch, every minor price fluctuation as an urgent, irresistible opportunity to jump in, often without a plan. The unbeatable trader saw most market noise as irrelevant static, waiting with stoic patience for a clear, undeniable signal that met precise criteria. When I first started to rigorously apply this protocol, the internal answers weren't always clean or immediate. Sometimes the teenager would still scream, an echo from my past failures. Jump! Don't miss out! Everyone else is making money, you'll be left behind. It took immense, quiet willpower to acknowledge that urgent, familiar voice, but then to gently, firmly dismiss it, letting its urgency dissipate. This was precisely where the discipline truly began to solidify. If the proposed action felt even slightly out of sync with the powerful identity I was cultivating, if it was driven by impatience, by a vague, undefined sense of obligation, by a burning, irrational desire to make back a previous loss, then the trade was automatically unequivocally canceled. The answer was a definitive no, spoken silently but with absolute conviction. This protocol became my quiet, unwavering guardian, a personal gatekeeper. It wasn't about achieving a state of market trading perfection, an impossible feat, but about being consistently aligned with my highest intentions and my strategic plan. Each successful intervention reinforced the new identity, slowly chipping away at the vestiges of the old. The profound silence of that deliberate pause, the mental and emotional space it meticulously created, became the crucible where impulsive urges were rigorously tested against strategic integrity. It consistently prevented the destructive cascade of poor decisions that so often followed one impulsive, ill-considered market entry. More importantly, it taught me to acutely differentiate between a genuinely strategic, high-probability move and a mere knee-jerk emotional reaction, often disguised as insight. The identity of the unbeatable trader wasn't about winning every single trade, an impossible feat, but about executing every single trade correctly, according to my system and my continually evolving self. It was about impeccable, consistent process, not merely chasing a perfect but elusive outcome. If the answer to my question was a resounding yes, this action perfectly aligns with my disciplined, analytical, patient self, then and only then would my fingers move with purpose to execute the order. But if there was even a whisper of doubt, a fleeting shadow of the teenager lurking, the screen remained untouched, the capital safe, and my evolving identity meticulously protected. It was a small internal battle fought countless times each day, but each quiet victory strengthened the very foundation upon which my strategic comeback would be built. The market, with all its inherent volatility, would always be there, but my former impulsive self, thankfully, was not. This internal referee was crucial. It was the finely tuned mechanism that ensured I remained the architect of my financial future, rather than its unwitting, habitual victim. The unbeatable trader, your new self. After all the backtesting, the late nights studying charts, and the agonizing losses, a profound truth emerged. Quiet but insistent. The market's challenge wasn't about finding a secret indicator or a holy grail strategy. It was about facing the person in the mirror. For years, I chased external systems, believing the perfect formula existed, but real mastery, I learned, isn't about the perfect what, but the disciplined who. The market, with all its volatility and unpredictable turns, simply cannot defeat a trader who has mastered their own mind. It cannot exploit emotions that are kept in check, nor can it derail a plan executed with unwavering consistency. This wasn't about revenge on the market. It was about the quiet, relentless forging of an unbeatable self. Your next identity shift. Your next identity shift. The quiet work of rebuilding is rewarding, but true transformation is internal. I shifted from overlooked to undeniable, not through noise, but through quiet resolve. Now I ask you, what is the one identity shift you will commit to implementing starting today? A conscious, deliberate choice indeed. Share your commitment in the comments below. If this narrative resonated, please like this video, subscribe to join our community of self-mastering traders, and share with others ready for their comeback. Together we redefine what's possible.